Making and breaking connections is an essential part of working with Grasshopper. Grasshopper is really about moving data around from one component to the next component. Being faster or really getting a handle of how to make and break connections between components is really going to make your workflow a lot more agile. Let's go ahead and practice and start with what we had before. Remember, I had 2 points and I was calculating the distance between those 2 points. I'm going to rebuild that, but you might already have it on your screen. I'm going to vector, point, construct point. To this first point, I'm going to change a bit the x coordinates. So I'm going to right click on it, set the number to 10. Now our point goes off in the x direction 10 units. Let's bring down another point. I'm going to go to vector point, construct point, and we'll leave that one at 0. Let's calculate the distance now. We're going to go to vector, point, and distance. We've already done this, but let's focus a little bit on what we're doing. Notice that if I go towards any of the inputs or outputs of the component, the cursor changes. It has this graphic of this cable with an arrow on it. Now, if we click on an output, notice that this cable comes out and it has an arrow. And if you go now towards inputs, you see that it wants to snap and be connected to one of those inputs. Let's go ahead, go to A and leave it there. Let's try that again with the second point. Click, drag, and bring it up to B and let go of the mouse. All right, we have a connection. What if we want to disconnect these things? Well, we have a few options. The first option is to do something very similar to what you just did. So if we hover and get close to the output with our mouse, we get this representation of this cable with the arrow. If we press Control, notice how that turns red. Let's go ahead and bring that all together. I'm going to keep Control pressed, and I'm going to left click and drag, bring that back to A. Notice how the connection disconnects. Let's connect it again and try one more time. With Control pressed, I'm going to click and drag, and it disconnects. That's the first option. Second option is actually we can right click on the input that contains the connection, and where it says disconnect, I'm going to select the icon. In this case, it's going to show you the icon of what you have actually connected there, which is the point. If I click it, it'll disconnect it. Now, what if we had two components or 2 points that we wanted to compare to a third point? Let's give that a try. I'm going to move this second point down a little bit. I'm going to select the first one, and I'm going to copy and paste. In order to make this point a little bit different, I'm going to give it a little bit of y. So I'm going to right click on y, set number, and I'll put a 5 here. So I have a point at 10, a point at 10.5, and a point at 0, 0, 0. Notice what happens if I try to connect the second point to the A input of the distance component. The connection that was there gets disconnected automatically, and the connection you're trying to make replaces it. So does that mean that you can only have one thing connected to any input? No, we have another option. If we wanted to compare both of these points and calculate a distance to the third point, we could still use the same configuration. We just need to add one more element. We're going to go back to our output here of the second point, and instead of what we did before, control, well, we don't want to disconnect, we want to add a connection. Press shift, notice that the cursor turns green. Now when we bring the connection, it gets added. And you can connect many, many, many things to all sorts of inputs. Now we have two connections. What does the disconnection look like in this case? Well, if we right click, you'll notice that you have two options, and it shows you which one you're going to be disconnecting. Or you can eventually disconnect them all. Right click, and you can have a view here of what you're actually going to be disconnecting. There's a few more options, generally dealing with cables, with how they look. They're again here at the input. So if we right click, notice that we also have this wire display. And this allows you to tweak a little bit how things look. By default, we have the default wire display. But we can also switch to faint, or if you like, you can either make a wireless connection. And when you make a wireless connection, the input has this wireless signal beaming, but if you select any of the components that make that connection, the connections are going to show up. I don't necessarily recommend starting making everything wireless because really the point of Grasshopper, as I mentioned before, is to see the connections and to create a diagram of your whole associative flow. I don't recommend starting with hidden representation of your cables, but there might be some occasions where a cable or a connection just goes through many of your components, and eventually that might be a good case to create a wireless connection.